So I got a chance to read it and I loved it. And
Oh,
what I loved most about it was just the feeling of New York at that time when things were starting, when things were fresh, when things were forming. And the way you spoke about your experiences, because I'm from Brooklyn, because that's where I grew up, it just was for me just extra juicy and extra warm. And I'm wondering how it's been received now that you've done 39 interviews from the first interview that we were lucky enough to get with you. How is it being received and how is it going?
well, this exciting thing for me, and this is something I'm still trying to fathom in what's left of my brain, is the fact that we sold out in 2 days the first printing. In 2 days, over 1,000 books were sold, and now they're printing up the second printing. So as a friend of mine said, you only have a few hundred friends. You don't have 1,000 friends. Somebody bought the book.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Antoinette, it's really means a lot to me that someone like yourself has said what you just said about it bringing you back. That's part of why I wrote the book. That time that I grew up in will not come again. It's over, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to, I guess, for older people to reminisce and for younger people to know about a time that seems to be interesting to them.
There was a lot, Julian, that we got in the first interview. And it's a beautiful conversation. There were so many questions that I had. And I was fascinated to see and understand and get a glimpse into how you took that information and did something so magnificent with it. And then it had me really wondering who raised you and the values that you were raised with. So when I got to read the book, I was just like, there it is. There it is. And you were raised with values and you had a strong father. You had a very strong mother. That didn't surprise me at all. But the fact that she was this powerful figure in your life
She was.
and the fact that she got her master's, she was a basketball player. I mean, and when the part that really touched me personally was that when she was assaulted at knife point, that she handled that situation with great authority. There's something to be said for that authority, right? And you were raised by a woman who had that authority. We're jumping right back in. So when I read the book, I thought, oh gosh, you gave it to me. You gave us the sense of what your environment was like and how you had those values to process through what you wanted to do, right? And so I was really grateful for that. And I loved the book on that level. You take us into your world and you show kind of how you were going through your experiences and how you maneuvered in a very kind of colorful world that you were surrounded with. So I appreciate that. And I think that's why the book is doing so well.
Antoinette, if you start out as I did, as an only child, where you knew that both parents loved you and you had love from both of them, you've got a giant head start. I mean, you just do.
That's true.
And I was very fortunate in many ways. I think whatever the best of my parents were, I was able to get. My father had a great sense of humor. I mean, he was really funny.
Right.
And my favorite thing, he sat me down as a little boy and he said, now, Julie, I want you to remember, if at first you don't succeed, forget it. Just forget it.
Amazing.
I mean, you can't get much better than that as far as laughing. You're just laughing.
I was raised that way too. And I think that's probably why I really connect with you. I really connect with the material of the book, but I just connect with those old world values and having a very stable-ish upbringing. You knew people were there for you. That's a big deal.
That's a big deal.
Yeah,
I've tried very hard not to be a spoiled human being, but there
yeah.
may be a couple of ex-wives who wouldn't agree.
I want to go there too. I want to go there too. Because you talked about Marin.
Yeah,
Is it
Marin did change my life. She just did.
when I watched the edit, I thought, oh, that's interesting. We talk about his rage, and you talk about Mirren and how she really helped heal that. And then I asked you, where do you think the rage is from? And then you said, well, I don't know. If I knew, I wouldn't have it. And I thought that was a very smart point that you make. But I'm always interested in when you're ready to deal with things, the person appears to help you deal with them. So I wanted to pay homage to Marin, and I also wanted to talk about what that rage maybe came from and how it fueled your work and how it hindered your work.
Well, there's no question that the anger was there. There was no question that with Marin's kindness and the ability to recognize that I was a little high strung at times, made it a point where you just wanted to do the best you could as a human being or as a husband. So I think it was the inspiration. I've never met anyone except my wife who doesn't have a little bit of a shadow side. And my wife doesn't have a shadow side. I sure do.
Right. Well, maybe she's had her shadow, but she's processed through it, or maybe she never had it at all.
Everybody does. Everybody
Yeah,
does.
yeah.
That's why I consider it's possible that she may be from another planet. It's just possible. But to get back to the anger, what part of it probably was as great as the love that I knew my mother had for me. I also knew that she was very strong, and I
Yeah.
didn't want to be particularly bossed around. So I may have touched on this, Antoinette, the first time we spoke, but I think that's one of the things we're here for, to try to evolve and to say, let's examine our life. What are we not happy with? How long are we going to blame our parents, our school, whatever? How about we kind of do what they say and examine your life. Not an unexamined life is not worth living. An examined life is worth living.
Sure, and that's a beautiful thing about writing your book, right? Because you talked about, um, having a moment to kind of look at your life and go through it. And I just imagine writing the book. You must have really kind of thought things that you didn't think you would think, or felt things that you didn't think you would feel.
That's true, and I wanted to entertain. That was important to me because if you're a reasonably good storyteller, you want to entertain the audience, so to speak. I mean, most people are interested in show business. We don't have what many countries have royalty. Our royalty is show business and sports players. And
Right.
so I thought, well, let me go into what it's like to produce a project, whether it's television, theater, or film, and to take you through the steps as quickly as I can because the minutia nobody wants, including me.
Right. Right. Right.
So to take the highlights, but to at least connect the dots and to see how a project is put together.
Yeah.
So I think that was really part of what I tried to do. And so, yes, entertain, but to educate a bit, at least say, hey, this is what a producer does, or this is what happens when you're making a movie. Maybe you better have a contingency, You're going to run into a lot of trouble, whatever it might be.
Right.
And of course, I've always collaborated. All my life, it's with writers, directors, and actors. Or if I had a company, and I had a few in my lifetime, I had employees and we collaborated. Here, there was not much to collaborate with, except, thank God, Marin. And I say it in the book, so I can say it publicly, Elaine May and Marlo Thomas. Those were my three tall women, as they say, as Edward Albee wrote. And I would read the chapters to them, and I remember Marla would say, well, maybe you should take that end and maybe open with that instead. And that was the kind of thing that
I
would
love
go
it.
on.
I love it. And the fact that you had a strong mother gave you a sort of an in on how to, I don't know, maybe understand women a little bit more.
Well, I'll say what Gloria Steinem said about me, which I'm so proud. She said, you're the least threatened man I ever met. And that was really, I thought that was great. But then I started thinking about it and said, well, of course, after my mother, nobody could come close.
Amazing. Amazing. I also was thinking too, there are so few people that we can point to who produced all three, right? And I thought to myself, well, that's interesting. Usually it's one or two, but three successfully? What do you attribute that to?
I had decided a long time ago I was going to learn every aspect of show business, every part I could, because I knew knowledge was power. And I thought, well, if I can accumulate enough knowledge, maybe I'll get a little power out of it.
Right.
I decided to try to do every part of show business that I could do. And I did a lot of it because I worked at a television network. Then I syndicated movies around the country. Then I worked as a theater exhibitor buying movies. Then I became a theater distributor. I had my own radio show, my own television show, my own record company. And I wanted to. I wanted to. I was curious and I was interested in those things. And I didn't want to feel that I had to be pigeonholed into this, only doing this or only doing that.
Right.
It's not like I sat down and said, oh, I've got a plan. My plan was simple. Learn knowledge. Just learn what this means. What does a movie mix mean?
Right.
What does OTO mean in television? And on and on. And I just kept trying to learn.
That's somebody who was kind of creating your own story. Like you were getting yourself ready for something, even though you may not have even been conscious about it. You were just doing what you loved,
Well, that's right. And that's really a very good point. I didn't sit down with a plan. I've known friends who have really had plans. I had no plan. My plan was just to get involved like you have in the business.
I love that. I love that. But I was always looking for the voice, a way to deliver my voice, whatever that was. And show business had the most offering for me. So that's what I did.
As Sinatra said, my way. So some people are fortunate. Most men who are successful think that's their song. That's my song, they say.
That's true. I like what you say about sometimes I'll be writing and if it cracks me up, and I like saying it, even if somebody says to me, I don't know if that joke is relevant or whatever, I'm like, you know what? If I like saying it, it's going to land somewhere, and that's my gauge, it's my gauge because I think I have a great sense of humor. And I know that that's one area I'm pretty well skilled at.
That's right. And I'm so glad that you crack yourself up because I'm now at least I know I'm not as crazy as it seemed at times. But I loved Sid Caesar and Emma Jean Coker and Carl Reiner and Howie Morris in a show called You Show of Shows.
Yeah.
I picked up the phone and looked in the book and saw Max Liebman. I wondered if he was alive. He had produced it.
Yeah.
I walked in and I said, Mr. Liebman, do you happen to have any of the copies of Show of Shows? Now, this is a good 30 years after, 25 years after. Come with me, young man, he said. And he opened up a closet,
right.
And there were 156 90-minute kinescopes. He had every show that he had produced on Your Show of Shows. That's how it began. And we absolutely opened that movie up theatrically, got wonderful reviews. I had a good title for it. The head was Hail Caesar.
Great. That's great.
So years later, I decided to do the same with Steve Allen, but he did not have the kinescopes. However, he had his Sunday night 8 p.m. shows. He had all of those. So we started to work together, and I realized two things. One, we had enough for 2 one-hour specials, and he wanted to do a movie, but things had changed by that time.
Right.
Television was branching out into cable, and so we eventually did 2 one-hour specials and sold them to HBO and Cinemax, and it was successful. So
yeah.
So I stopped I quit while I was ahead. Sid Caesar, Steve Allen, and I stopped.
You know, it's interesting. One of the things that we touched on in the last interview, which I find really interesting, is that you've had to pivot a lot as the business changed, right? And you pivoted and pivoted and pivoted.
I became a bit of a whirling dervish,
Yes.
flying all over, but
Yeah.
trying to come down, lightly. I just wanted to I wanted to produce what interested me. And I realized that what theater gave me more than film and television was one location. That was much more controllable than flying all over with 20 and 30 locations. Much less budget at that time. I didn't need the kind of millions that I needed to do for television and movies, but for theater, I could do an off-Broadway show for four or $500,000. Not that that's cheap, but in comparison, it was. And so that's what I started to do. And I think to myself, hey, you've wasted your time in movies and television. This is for you because you're a New Yorker. And whatever you like, there's enough New Yorkers are going to like the same thing. Now, of course, timing is everything, as they say,
Sure.
especially when you're a
Sure.
stand-up.
Well,
But and what I didn't realize was that Broadway and theater was changing. When I grew up, and even in my early years of producing, the vast majority of the patrons, the customers, came from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Long Island. But now tourism was taking over. So all of a sudden, my idea that as a New Yorker, what I like New Yorkers would like, I'm not necessarily tuned in to Waterloo, Iowa, or Weslaco, Texas.
not especially. Not especially.
Another part of my career where I went all over the country selling motion pictures to television stations. And that was interesting, Antoinette, because every television station in those days were a multi-million dollar corporation, because to build a tower to be able to broadcast in even the smallest of towns was a millions of dollars. So you'd find out that the person who and the group who owned the television station happened to own the radio station and happened to own the newspaper. So all of a sudden you're dealing in a town or a small city where a group of men or a man controls what people are going to hear and read. Pretty frightening.
Just humor me for a second, because I like the details. Give me just a typical visit. You get off the plane, you get to the hotel, then you go to the station, and what happens?
When you sell motion pictures to television stations, you sell by list. They don't screen them. They go down the title list of your packages. Now, the movies I had were fantastic movies, but they were sophisticated movies.
Right.
But I became a zealot of sort because I felt if I could sell these movies to these little cities and towns, I was upgrading the television programming. And I really felt that.
You're a visionary. You're always trying to push boundaries. You were trying to get people to maybe broaden their horizons. I mean, isn't that sort of part of what you were doing? Yes, of course, to sell the movie and to get the movie distributed, but pushing the envelope a little bit.
Yeah,
That's what I'm
that's
hearing.
true. I'm trying. I'm trying. Yeah.
It's powerful, and you're doing something. You're preserving this world needs us to know what it comes from. When I was listening to the edit of the last show, I had it on in my car, and I was thinking, boy, you really have so many stories that are enriching, that a radio show and a podcast would be amazing for you to do, because this is important stuff.
The visionary aspect is very kind of you, and but even when I did my radio show and my television show, I was interested in going back into the person's life. I wanted to know where they came from. I know who they are now, but where did they come from? And to listen to Bob Hope and George Burns and some of the great people that I was able to get to sit down, Betty Davis, it was fascinating to me. And almost every person, to a man or a woman, almost everyone said, I did not have a plan. I just wanted to be in show business.
So, Julian, we talk a lot about your mom, Charlotte, and her strength, but also your dad, Lewis. And what was he like, and how did he influence you?
Well, he certainly influenced me because he loved show business. He loved all aspects of it. He had a great singing voice, Antoinette. He really could sing well. He probably could have gone into it, but he was first and foremost a sensational athlete.
Wow.
And at 19 years old, tried out for the Yankees, the New York Yankees, as a shortstop. And my father tried out and made AAA, which is AAA is right before you go to the majors.
Right.
They put him in AAA in Kansas City. My grandmother and grandfather said, there are very few Jews in baseball. There are even less in Kansas City. You're not
Right.
going. You're not going. It was a whole different time. It was 1929, and the Depression had just started. So he just listened to his parents, and I think he lived with that his whole life. So he was funny. He loved show business. He had a great singing voice, and he was wildly supportive.
You had a very very good upbringing with very strong people. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's not that common, you
It's
know.
not that common, and I definitely had a leg up, and there's no question. I know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, Elaine May. Elaine May. What's to say about Elaine May? I mean, wow, 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 wow. When I think about her, I think about all of the incredible work that she's done, and I kind of want to know, how do you guys creatively work together? Is there friction, or is it seamless? And the dynamic, I would love to know.
I was working at Paramount Pictures as a vice president of production, and we had a movie that was called Mikey and Nicky. And this movie starred John Cassavetes and Peter Falk and Ned Beatty. Elaine had written and directed it. I get a telephone call from Elaine May, and she says, hello, and I say hello, and she says, Warren Beatty has told me that you're okay for a studio executive, which was her opener, which I thought to myself, well, I gather compared to studio executives, at least I'm okay.
All right.
And she said, I want to talk with you about my movie. And she said, there's going to be a sneak preview in Washington, D.C. And she said, just don't put my name in it. I said, well, why? She said, because they're going to think it's a comedy. And it's not a comedy. It's a tough, gritty movie. I tell the president of the company, we can't put her name in. He says, oh, we can put it in. I said, no, she's really very specific. She does not want her name in. The movie starts. We're all in Washington. We all fly down to Washington. Elaine's there, head of the studio. Everybody's there in Washington. And we screen the movie, and the beginning is very funny. It really is funny. So people see Elaine May, funny, and then it turns tough and gritty and really a really very, very urban movie.
Right.
And at the end, people are booing and people are walking out. And I go into the manager's booth to meet with Elaine and the other people. And I walk in, and Elaine said, you know what a liar is? I said, what? She said, you told me that my name wouldn't be in there, and it was in there. And she said, you hear that? And they were still booing. And the president of the studio at that time said, it was my fault. I told him, I overruled him. So that was a little bit of a help, but I felt terrible. I felt terrible.
Right.
We came back to New York, and I went to visit Elaine the next day. And I said, look, I'm so sorry. Come with me. We're going to go around the theaters to see if they're cross-plugging, if the trailers are up. Let's see what we can do. I ended up going around with Elaine. I put together all kinds of things, and we bonded. We just bonded. She knew how bad I felt, and I knew how talented she was. And that's how it all began.
Amazing.
It is. It is amazing. But that was being at Paramount. And while my years at Paramount were the most unhappy I've ever had working anywhere, I met some of my closest, dearest friends.
But the toughest years are the years sometimes you learn the most from, right?
That's right. I learned I wanted to run a studio. I thought I had the ability to run a studio. I found out maybe I had the ability, but I clearly didn't have the stomach. I tried to quit. I went in and asked to leave, and they said, no, you're going to stay, but let the new president know. So I went to him and I said, look, he said, I understand you want to leave. I said, yeah, I do. He says, why do you want to leave? I said, I'm not happy. He said, is it Columbia? Is it Fox? I, I guess the concept of happy, too much.
Amazing.
Had to be something else. Just went right over the head. But again, it's not here. I'm not here to blame Paramount. It would have been any studio. I just
Right.
realized that as much as I wanted to run a studio, I could not swim in those waters, or wanted to. I just didn't want to, but I couldn't either. I just couldn't.
It's
So
always an interesting thing when you're trying to merge business with creativity, right? And then I think that's where it becomes difficult because you have the artist and then you have the business person and you need the business person to deliver the art and sometimes things get compromised and I always find this business to be very challenging in that regard. So you are that together. And I think that's probably why at the end of the day you were like, you know what? I gotta go because I ain't happy here. I can't
well,
function in integrity in this environment.
well, that's absolutely correct. At that time, I did not have a wife. I had no children. I didn't have a mortgage. I didn't have to worry about college tuition. So I could walk out. I didn't care because I didn't have that. I'm not so sure I could have done that if it wasn't for
Right.
the fact that I didn't have the responsibilities that most men at that point had. And it made me very independent.
And you know what it makes me think about too? It also, when you talk about the responsibility, not to veer off course, but I always think about how difficult it must be for a man to have, once you have responsibility, it's like your life is kind of like tied to your family. And you cannot make those decisions based on your own happiness anymore. And I guess that's the same for a woman in a different way. But it's an awful lot of responsibility that our society puts on men, generally speaking.
I feel women take care of the family, but if they have a career they want to do, they really have to put the family first. So I think men and women both seem to have, when we look back, the career is always fighting the family. It's
Yes.
always that way, and it's one of the things I write in the book where I say, if you really want this, you have to remember you're going to have to hurt your personal life because you can't make it in show business, in my opinion, without initially hurting that family life.
I agree.
It's tough. It just is tough. I'm just very grateful and fortunate that
Yeah.
whatever happened to me, I was able to get the two things that matter in life, as far as I'm concerned. It's the person you love, and it's the career that you choose.
Yeah. Ugh, love that. See, you just got me all going. That when you follow, you said there was no plan, and you meet people that have plans. I didn't have a plan except I knew what my highest excitement was. I knew where what gave me excitement and passion, and that's what I followed. And I had a family that gave me love and supported that.
What you've done, is great in enabling yourself to have a show like this, to speak to people who you respect or admire every once in a while, and more importantly, have your creative juices because you're a creative person. A pandemic doesn't let you go out to play comedy club so easily. It just
Right.
doesn't.
I wouldn't be here if the pandemic. I mean, literally, that my show was shut down and I turned the camera around. That was it. It was like that quick. And I'm like,
That's
I'm
right.
doing this. So thank you
That's
for
right.
thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. I think creative people are we're always hustling. We're very resourceful. We have to be.
We seem to be an endangered species.
Okay, so let's segue into uh, the paranormal. So Shirley MacLaine, that relationship, because that's interesting to a lot of us, and how you approach that subject matter, and do you live that?
Well, my wife is a fourth generation psychic. Her mother, her grandmother, her great grandmother, they know that. They may go back even further. And in Ireland, where they came from, they say you have the sight if you're a psychic. My wife's mother, was for Peter Sellers and for Princess Margaret. I mean, she really was a top psychic. My wife, though, she had a whole different take on it, and
Right.
she's written a wonderful book called The Clairvoyant's Daughter, Growing Up in a Mystical World. It's not out yet. It's not out yet.
We're here.
Shirley MacLaine came into my life as a lot of entertainment people did through the Paramount production.
Wow.
Um, Shirley came to me. She was at that point living with Pete Hamill. They were an item, and Pete was a writer. And he had written a wonderful script about Amelia Earhart. And she
Uh-huh.
wanted to play Amelia Earhart.
I know
And
this.
I wanted to produce it at Paramount. And once again, I was my usual power. All I could say was to a project, no, and I'll get back to you. I wanted to do it. They told me you can't. I went back and said sorry, but we became friends. They knew how much I liked, and I did like the script, and we just kind of hit it off. And we started to go on what we called movie marathons. I would pick her up around 10 to 12. We'd catch a 12 o'clock film, eat at 1:30, quarter to 2, run for the 3 o'clock show, have dinner, and then go to the last show. We see 3, sometimes 4 movies in a day.
Amazing.
And I remember her asking me, do you sign up actors? And I said, no. And I said, why? She said, well, I just did this movie with a bunch of ladies as a young kid who's going to be a movie star. The movie's called Steel Magnolias. Her name is Julia Roberts. Now,
Yeah.
to the paranormal, well, spending time with Shirley, she would send me to people who would tell me I lived on Atlantis and all these things that people deride and make fun of. I was enjoying very much. I have a very open mind. People say, oh, that can't be, that can't be. And you think to yourself, do you believe that the moon affects the Atlantic Ocean? Oh, of course, everybody knows that. But the idea that maybe reincarnation is true, maybe there's life after that, maybe there's so many things, why would you dismiss it? Why would you close the door? That's what I never understood. So Shirley and my wife are huge believers. I'm an open fellow to it. I'm not as sure as they are, but I've had a few that are very hard to understand. And one of them really was, I was in the People's Republic of China,
Wow.
and I went over, and I was in my room thinking about why I had picked up out on a limb. I'm in a bookshop. There's nobody there but a cashier, and something, and I mean somebody or some force, pushes me to that book. I mean, shoves me to that book. I could hear any of them saying, come on. Well, sorry, that's what happened. I took the book, and I'm flying to Hong Kong. I'm flying everywhere to get to People's Republic, and I'm reading this book, and I'm up all night. I can't stop reading the book. Now I think to myself, I got to try to find Shirley. And it's ringing and ringing and ringing, and woman says, hello. And I said, is Shirley there? Who is this? I said, this is Julian Schlossberg. She says, Julian, it's me. She says, I never picked this up, and something told me to pick this phone up. I said, Shirley, you're not going to believe it. I just finished out on a limb. I said, and I just had to talk to you about it, but I'm in China. What do you mean? I said, I'm in China.
You know, Shirley mentions the Amelia Earhart in the book Out on a Limb. She talks Mort Viner, I guess her agent for
What binder? Yeah.
Mort Viner says, you know, we have a shot on the Amelia Earhart script. I remember that. I mean, I was already going through this kind of awakening before I was in high school when that happened, and then the book came out, and it was like, I know this stuff. Like, I know this stuff. And so I remember a lot about it. And when you were talking about the Amelia Earhart, she
Yeah.
does talk about that in her book. So it's
Well,
all interconnected.
she's a remarkable woman because besides being a terrific actress, a fantastic dancer, a lovely singer, a fine writer, she had Marilyn and I over for dinner, and she cooked the meal.
Did you cook pasta? I'm just wondering.
No, it was a great chicken dish.
Oh, beautiful. Wonderful. Well, now that we're on Shirley, who's born on April 24th, tell me about Barbara and Liza, if you wouldn't mind.
I had gotten to know Barbara because on my radio show, she had opened the film with Chris Christopherson, Star is Born, and Frank Pearson, who wrote and directed it, went after her publicly. And I was outraged. I didn't know Barbara. I just knew her talent. But I was outraged by the fact that he was upset that she wanted to say things. Well, she had a reputation way before she made Star is Born. And the fact is that the movie's being made because of her, not because of him. It's on her back. It's her movie. So she should have the right to say what she wants and what she doesn't want. So I defended her. And it got back to her. And we became really kind of close friends. And in New York, there was going to be a birthday party for her. It was going to be about eight or nine people, and I was invited, and I was excited to go. At that time, we both lived on Central Park West in New York. And maybe a week or so later, I was called by Barbara's assistant to say, hey, look, Barbara bumped into Jack Nicholson. They share the same birthday.
Right.
They're going to have a double birthday party, and Liza Minnelli's going to be throwing it. And I said, well, you know, I love the idea of a small party, but this sounds like a huge party, and I would just rather not attend. But please tell Barbara thank you. Well, Barbara Streisand, if she wants something, or whatever, she picked up the phone, called me, and said, you're coming to the party.
Amazing.
So I went to the party, and I walked in the door, and I didn't know Liza Minnelli at all. But I got to the door and looked around the room, and I saw a lot of famous people, but no one I knew at all. And all of a sudden, these two ladies from different rooms, Barbara is yelling, that's the guy I told you about. Liza Minnelli and Barbara come charging towards me, each take my hand and walk me away from the party. I have no idea what's going on, but I'm as happy as hell. I don't care. In fact, I have two of the great talents of the world, and I don't have to even get involved with the party. So I don't know what's happening, but I'm going. I'm going wherever.
I'm in.
This sounds great to me. And I go into this room, and in the room on the wall are these gigantic drawings, huge drawings of the Radio City Music Hall. And what Barbara says to Liza is, remember, he ran movie theaters for years. He knows this. And Liza said, well, this is my father, Vincent Minnelli, the great director, had drawn these. He had drawn the original drawings of the Radio City Music Hall. I was really agog. And they left, and I studied these incredible, unbelievable, intricate drawings of things going up and down and curtains going up. It was incredible.
I wonder where those things are now. Do you think probably Liza has them, I hope?
Oh, sure, she had them. She had them framed and on the wall, and oh my God, it was just terrific. So I went back into the room because I was hungry and picked up my food. And when the two women came charging towards me, the room went quiet. Nobody said anything except, who the hell is that guy? Who's that guy that they're all taking care of? Anyway, I go back into the party, pick up the food, and I go to find a room. It's a pretty big apartment. And I go to find a room where no one is in except a bartender. And a woman comes in and says, excuse me, and I don't look up. And she walks by, and we're kind of like on window seats, sitting next to each other. And she turns to me and says, are you a friend of Jack's? And I said, no, I'm actually a friend of Barbara's. And I look up, and it's Michelle Pfeiffer. And more beautiful woman I had not seen in my life. And so excited to share the fact that she has just adopted a child. And telling me about this child and how happy she was to be a single mother and what it meant to her. And I'm just sitting there thrilled to be talking to her and really enjoyed it. And then we both left the room, and I go into the main room, and there's Mike Nichols. Thank God. Somebody I know. And he's talking to Jack Nicholson because they're making the movie Wolf in New York. That's where Michelle is.
Pfeiffer. Right.
And
right,
that's why Jack is there.
right,
I knew Jack a little, and I knew Mike a lot.
right.
And all of a sudden, someone's tapping me on the shoulder, and I turn around, and it's Michelle Pfeiffer, and she said I was at the elevator, and I realized I hadn't said goodbye to you. And she came back to the party, said goodbye, and left. And I would say this: there was never a moment with Michelle Pfeiffer that she didn't think of me as just a fellow human being. I can't say the same about her. I thought about her. Wouldn't it be great if? Wouldn't it be great if she's single? But of course, it was only up here.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. What a beautiful kind of peek into a night in the life of, in a
Yeah.
time, you know?
It,
Um,
it,
two things. You strike me as somebody who's quite social. Big groups, not your thing?
I like small groups
Uh-huh.
because I feel that we can learn about each other and kind of share. And so
Uh-huh.
most of the parties that I go to are people that I know or
Right.
what Marin and I through.
Yeah.
Well, I do have a story I want to tell you
Okay.
as a fellow lady who loves comedy and can do it well.
Thank you.
I'm going to distribute a movie made by Michael Palin of the Monty Python, a great, great comic actor and a lovely friend he became. But at that time, I didn't know him. And so I went to England, I screened the movie, I bought the film, and I was going to meet him in New York. And it was years ago. Arnold Schwarzenegger had become a huge movie star. And I'm sitting in a restaurant on Central Park South, and he walks over, puts out his hand, and shakes my hand and says to me, I always wanted to make a movie called Conan the Librarian. That's his first words to me. I said, I know the advertising line. He said, what is it? Don't forget to return the book. And at that, Antoinette, if you said, how did you and Michael Palin became friends? That's what did it. That
That's
cemented
hilarious.
our.
That's all you need. That's all you need.
So
That's great.
if you want an ending to our a suggestion for an ending for our interview, that's it. But I could sit here for another hour. Don't worry if you want
We have a lot. And this is one of the reasons we wanted to do it again, because there's
to.
just, you are a treasure, a
Oh,
global show
thank,
business treasure. It is such an honor to sit
oh,
with you. It really
thank,
is, Julian, on so
thank
many
you.
levels. I'm verklempt. You know, it's really, yeah, because there's so many people in this world. You know, you think that, oh, these are just stories, but so many people want to know, and they want to be a part of that world, because that world is fading fast, and we want to be reminded of it. We want to be reminded of the charm, the grace, the elegance, the class, the integrity. We need to be reminded of it. So thank you for sharing.
It really, Antoinette, that's really one of the major reasons I wrote the book, because as I said earlier, I don't think that time that I lived will ever come again, and it was a wonderful time, and I knew it. Thank goodness, I knew it. It wasn't, so often in life you say, "Oh, I only had known," but I did know. I knew it was
Right,
special, and
right.
that's great too.